This program is brought to you by the partners of A Rood Awakening International. Help others find truth. Support A Rood Awakening International today.
King Solomon declared, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and the glory of kings to search it out." Proverbs 25:2. Finding the treasure of biblical truth often requires jumping through hoops, but some hoops are more dangerous than others. Tonight, Michael Rood and Nehemia Gordon share the emerging end-time truths now being revealed to those who are willing to diligently chase after the concealed matters of God and the deception that awaits those who leap without looking. Because it's the end of the sixth day, the sun is set, and this is Shabbat Night Live.
As they take this message out into the world.
Shabbat Shalom, Torah fans. Welcome to Shabbat Night Live with Michael Rood. Passover is next month. Yes, it's coming up very soon. We want you to experience it with us. All you have to do is follow the information on the bottom of your screen there. We have amazing information from Nehemia Gordon there about the connection between the split rock at Rephidim. This is the rock that Moses struck and the water gushed out. And the connection between that and the pool of Siloam, where when Yeshua put mud on the man's eyes and told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam, there's a connection there between these two sites. And we'll talk more about that right now with our guest from this evening, the founder of Rood Awakening International and the host of Passover 2019. Please welcome Michael Rood.
Oh, thanks. It's good to be a guest on Shabbat Night Live, Scott. Thank you.
A little different, I guess.
Well, I tell you, I am so excited about what's going to be happening at Passover this year. Nehemia, when he got back from Israel, we had a conversation that, I just so desired that he could come and be with us for Hanukkah, but we were already packed up with Mount Sinai and everything that we're doing. And so the conversations began then, and he said that he would really like to come to Passover. And I knew that the information, the archaeological evidence that he had found just in the past months, that this was going to be breaking stuff. And so we conversed about this. Couldn't have him at Hanukkah, but then I said, Nehemia, you gotta come over. You know, we couldn't meet in Jerusalem as we usually do at our coffee shop and sit there and have a cup of espresso for 5 hours. And so I said, come on over to the house, just spend a week, 10 days. And so he came over, and what we do at the house is we get in the hot tub. And I said, Nehemia, at the end of this, if you wanna get in front of the camera, if we wanna do something for Shabbat Night Live, we can do it, but this is just to relax. It's just so we can connect. And so after the first night, 5 hours in the hot tub, I said, we got to get it right now. And so we started doing what is jumping through flaming hoops. We started that very thing that week, and that's not complete. This is what we're doing right now on Shabbat Night Live, but at Passover, now we're going to bring in the big news, the big news. And one of the things on Sidelight is that we now have permission from the Vatican to be able to publish the manuscripts from the junk box that Nehemia purchased the right on that. So Nehemia will be bringing forth this and more information, and I have been sworn to secrecy. And that's why I can't say anything more about it. But ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited about what we're going to be doing at Passover this year. This is going to be an extravaganza that is going to be worth crossing land and sea to get there for this.
Indeed. In fact, the information that Nehemia has is so extensive that, usually we have a few guest speakers and they each get an hour here, an hour there. We've given Nehemia pretty much the whole day on Saturday.
That's right. And really, we need to have twice that much.
Really?
And so we are really going to pack it in. And when you see the manuscript evidence that he's going to be bringing forth, this is breaking news. It is breaking news to the whole Christian world as well as the Jewish world.
That's an exciting. So join us for Passover. You see the information on the bottom of your screen, how you can be a part of it. And we really want you to be there. As Michael says, it's worth crossing land and sea for. And one of the things we're doing there is an exclusive documentary screening. Now, next month, March 14, 16, and 19, in theaters across the country, is Tim Mahoney's brand new documentary called The Patterns of evidence, the Moses controversy. And we had Tim here.
Yes, that's right. Tim came in so that we could do some preliminary work on this, and it's going to be released in more than 1,000 theaters across America, and we are one of those theaters. Everyone that comes to Passover will be able to get to see this. This has been over 18 years in the making. It was more than 18 years ago that I met Tim Mahoney as the president of the International Christian Filmmakers Association, and I said, Tim, you got to get involved in this. Got him connected with Jim and Penny Caldwell. He, from that point on, went over into Saudi Arabia. Now he's able to access some of the work that was done by Andrew Jones and Ryan Murrow. And so what is going to be shown in theaters around the world is going to be right here at Passover. The Moses controversy. This is going to put the nails in the coffin of the theologians who have sold out the Bible because somebody made a mistake in reading an Egyptian hieroglyph more than 100 years ago, and all of the seminaries basically bailed on the Bible to embrace this fault. And so he is exposing this, and he continues to expose this in this next segment. And then what's going to happen after that is the Red Sea crossing. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't want to miss this particular version of, or segment of, Patterns of Evidence. It's a life changer.
Now, speaking of controversies, tonight, as you mentioned, Michael, we're starting Jumping Through Flaming Hoops. This is the first episode tonight playing of you and Nehemia sitting down. And when we had the meeting, we have a pre-production meeting to talk about what we're going to do in the series.
That's right.
And what you talked about in the hot tub.
We lay it all out, exactly what we're going to do.
And it didn't happen.
Yeah. As soon as the cameras roll, we start talking, and it didn't happen. And that's why, we have to continue on with Passover. And really, we've got stuff, ladies and gentlemen, that we could carry on for literally a half year of Shabbat Night Live with recent discoveries. So we are living in exciting times.
We are.
I never expected to have the manuscripts that he's going to be bringing forth at Passover. Never expected in my entire life we would have our hands on it. You're not going to read about this in the Nestle Island Critical Greek text. These are manuscripts that have been, for the most part, lost to antiquity, but they have been found.
Wow, that's amazing. And, I'm so excited to hear that he actually got permission from the Vatican to publish these. From
the Vatican junk box.
From the junk box in the Vatican,
From Luke, the Hebrew Gospel of Luke, with the name with all the vowel points, because the Messianic Jews never followed the prohibition of the rabbis. And so they continued to copy their records in Hebrew. And so we got Luke, we've got John, I'm going to let Nehemia tell the rest of the story.
Okay. And tonight, like we said, Jumping Through Flaming Hoops, this is an exciting conversation because Nehemia brings out some things that are really important for our Christian audience to understand too, and understand the difference between what does it mean to obey the law but not be under the law, all that good type of stuff from a man who is a Jew himself.
Raised as a son of a rabbi, like 33 generations of rabbinic scholars. And so, his insight into these particular things, that's why we sit there for hours and we discuss these things. This is where I get fed, It's having Nehemia over, and this is, so you get to share a little bit in what my life is like, what I get to do in my spare time.
All right.
When Nehemia comes over.
Well, good. This is going to be fun then. All right, good stuff. So stay tuned. Coming up, the first episode of Michael Rood and Nehemia Gordon's new series, Jumping Through Flaming Hoops, and we have you to thank for it. We do absolutely everything we can to give you teachings every week, but we have no sponsors. There are no corporations or trust funds keeping this thing going. As long as we have support from viewers, we keep going, and that's why it's so important to stand with us, stand with Michael Rood to keep this information going out across the world. Our love gift is one of the best ways to help us do just that. Here's how you can take part. Watch this.
Spreading the message of Yeshua was not easy in the Apostles' day, and it's still not easy today. In these tumultuous times, we are all called to stand, as Paul says in Ephesians 6:13. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand.
We don't see the signs, miracles, and wonders that they saw in the first century because nobody is teaching what Yeshua taught. Nobody is tapping into that power and taking on the responsibility as a royal priesthood.
Stand is a walk through Paul's early ministry, and it highlights the struggles that come with throwing off your old life and living for Yeshua.
When Jews, when Israelites, when they do not do what they have been called to do, and they were the ones that were chosen by God, the chosen people to be the ones to reconcile the world to God, they were to be chosen and called to be priests and kings.
Stand is an exclusive teaching available only in February. It's a gift from Michael Rood to you for your love gift donation of just $50. Or with a love gift donation of $100 or more, we'll send you Stand plus a silver-plated cup and saucer set to celebrate Yeshua's sacrifice and resurrection.
I want to see some medals, some commendations on you when you get out of the battle. You're going into it, you're being sent into it, and I know that you're going to be able to handle this thing.
Get Stand plus a silver-plated cup and saucer set. Call 800-788-7887. That's 800-788-7887 to make your love gift donation now and receive the Stand collection. Or visit our website at monthlylovegift.com. Hurry, offer ends February 28th.
The last night that Yeshua was with his disciples, the Last Supper before the Passover was sacrificed, he took bread and he took wine. He said before that Abraham saw his day and rejoiced. But what does that mean? He saw his day and rejoiced. Well, it was the Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, that brought forth bread and wine to Abraham. He blessed the Most High with the blessing that Abraham taught Yitzhak, Yitzhak taught Yaakov, and is still spoken today. Whenever bread and wine is served at a Jewish table, whenever it is Sabbath, especially around the world, the bread and the wine are brought forth with this blessing. Baruch atah Yehovah, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pari hagafen. Blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, the creator of the fruit of the vine. And Yeshua then said, blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. He said, this represents my body, which will be broken for you. This represents my shed blood that pays the sin penalty because of the broken covenant. As often as we do this, we do this in remembrance of him. So break the bread, share the wine, and we do this in remembrance of him until he comes. "18 years ago, Nehemia Gordon walked into my apartment in Jerusalem and said, you've got to see this. He had been studying, researching the ancient Hebrew Matthew, and he said, what Yeshua says here is absolutely brilliant. I realized at the time I've never heard a Christian pastor ever say, you got to listen to this. What Yeshua says here is absolutely brilliant. But what he laid out before me then turned into the book, Nehemia Gordon's first book, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. And this is what began opening the door for me to more fully understand the gospel of the kingdom that Yeshua was teaching. And without his research into the Hebrew Matthew and his input into the chronological gospels, I could never have produced the chronological gospels. I'd been working on these things for 38 years at the time, but there were key elements that were missing that were absolutely essential. And so it was 7 years after that date that Nehemia walked into my office in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he began telling me the story about what he was referring to as the Smithfield Revival, something that happened to him. And this was just before Shavuot, and that turned into what became the Open Door series, a prayer to our Father, which is the first in this series that was done at Shavuot that year. And then at Yom Teruah, proclaim the name, and then finally, at Hanukkah that year, stand against the ban. And that's when we joined Nehemia Gordon in standing against the ban, against the name, a ban that the rabbis put in place. And what became of that is over 1,000 ancient Hebrew manuscripts with the name, with all the vowel pointings. And ladies and gentlemen, we have Nehemia back here again. 7 years later, this is after we've done several things. Ladies and gentlemen, Nehemia Gordon. Nehemia, it's great to have you here.
So, Mike, it's great to be back here. You know, we had a conversation last year. I called you up at the beginning of 2018, and I said, Michael, we've been searching these Hebrew manuscripts for the name Yehovah with the full vowels, and we now have access to more manuscripts than I ever thought I would have access to in my entire life. One of the things that happened in the last around 2 years is there's been a worldwide push to digitize all these manuscripts, put them online. And just to give you some context, I had found 2 manuscripts with those vowels back in 2001. And then over the years, I found a 3rd and then a 4th. And then in the summer of, I believe it was around 2015, I wanted to get a 5th. I had this burning desire in my heart to get a 5th. And it required me to ultimately drive around the United States at an 8,000-mile circuit journey that led me to the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, which is one of the key Masoretic Bible manuscripts. And I went there so I could find manuscript number 5. I didn't know what I would find. I didn't know if I would open that manuscript and see those full vowels of God's holy name, Yehovah, in Hebrew. But I finally got there and saw that manuscript, and that was number 5. And that was in the summer. The following, December and going into January, I started to look for more manuscripts. And my goal at that time, and recently I looked at one of my old emails, the goal at that time was to get to 10 manuscripts. And I thought, how will I do this in my entire life? If I spend if it took me all these years.
How many years altogether
right,
had you spent up to this point?
Well, so 2001 until I think it was 2016 at that point. So that's 15 years I had 5 manuscripts. That's on average 1 every 3 years. So I thought, okay, so to get to 10 manuscripts will take another 15 years. Not only have we exceeded 10 manuscripts, we did a program, and that was, I believe it was called, I don't know if it was the Karaite Files or the Gentiles Shall Know My Name.
And each one of these is an absolute treasure.
Just chock full of information.
5 hours of biblical research that exceeds anything that's been done in hundreds of years, literally.
Well, so we shared in one of those series about how we got to 52 by Shavuot. And
that the Gentiles shall know my name.
And then I called you up in January of 2018, and I said, Michael, we're way past 52. We've reached 1,000. That was 1,000. So my goal in life was to get to 10. And within a year, instead of getting to 10, we got to 1,000 manuscripts with the name Yehovah, with the full vowels. Well, Michael, as of this recording, right now at this moment, by the time this is broadcast, this will be out of date. We'll have more manuscripts. But as of right now,
if we recorded it yesterday, it would be out of date
literally,
today.
Last night, I went to bed at like 1 a.m., and it was a different number. We found more since then. The number is 1,721 as of right now, manuscripts with the full vowels of the name. And that's after having looked in over 7,000 manuscripts, because not every Hebrew Bible manuscript has those vowels, Yehovah. Usually one of the vowels is missing. And the name is unpronounceable the way it's written, but there's 1,721 manuscripts known so far with those full vowels. They range in the entire gambit, the entire period of manuscripts that have vowels in the Hebrew text. The earliest dated ones that we know of are from the 9th century AD, all the way up until the 19th century. In most places they stopped making Hebrew Bible manuscripts by the 15th century, but in Yemen, for example, which was an isolated Jewish community that never developed printing, they still continue to copy the Bible by hand. father to son, scribe to a disciple, copying up by hand, and even there they put the vowels Yehovah. Now, I have some new exciting discoveries that's
why you're here. We can't wait.
So we've continued this push, and I remember a couple years back I was speaking to a very good friend, and we were pushing for 100 manuscripts at the time, right? We had hit 52, and I said, okay, let's try to get to 100, and my goal at that point was to get to 100 by the end of the year. Now, remember, a few weeks after the end of the year, we reached 1,000, right? But the goal was to get to 100 by the end of the year, and this man said to me, why do you need 100? When are you going to stop? And I said, why would I ever stop? and really, my goal is to search every Hebrew Bible manuscript, every printed Bible that was ever made, every source I can find to verify what vowels they have of the name. Now, we started.
This will lead us to the correct pronunciation of the name, which has been, theorized about. And
look, Michael,
speculation.
I had an experience, what I believe was a God experience in 2001. And that's, in a way, that was a really personal experience that it was very difficult for me to share with people. In my tradition, you don't share those kinds of things with people. And I would gradually share it with people, and eventually people are like, look, you got to tell people about this. You can't just tell your friends. You got to tell people about this. And I shared that experience in the series we did, in the Open Door series. It was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was the second section there of the Open Door series. I finally shared that, and I think I had shared that in a few other places with small groups. But I shared it with the world and proclaimed the name.
Proclaimed the name. That was it. That was when you shared that, and I literally wept. When I go back into this, your personal experience, I can relate to it. This was a real thing.
And for me, it was a real thing. But I come from an academic background, Michael. So this was a God experience I had, and that's very personal for me. But when I approach these types of things, I also need to, just because of the way my Litvak brain is wired, and if you don't know what that is, guys, go watch the series, the Open Door series. My Litvak brain, the way it's wired, is that I have to put my personal beliefs aside and always take a fresh approach and look at a question. And so when the man said to me, why don't you stop when you reach 100? When will you ever stop? And I said, why would I ever stop? What I was really asking is, well, if I looked at 100 manuscripts and I found the vowels Yehovah, and let's say at that time that was out of 500 manuscripts, right? Well, what if I looked at another 100 and found the vowels Yahweh or Yahuwah or some other set of vowels? I need to look at all the evidence that I possibly can to establish what is it, at the very least, what did the Jewish scribes who transcribed the name, what did they believe the vowels to be, right? Because look, here's what we can't do. We cannot go back in time and ask or listen in as God is speaking to Moses from the burning bush. So I can have my faith and have beliefs about that, but what I can establish with solid factual evidence is the Jewish scribes who preserved the oracles of God throughout the ages, what did they believe the vowels to be? And they pretty consistently transcribed the vowels when they put in the full set of vowels as Yehovah. Now, there's some exceptions we found. We actually found a single manuscript, Michael, where there was different vowels, and I've shared some other minor variations in the past on your program, but we found, this is a new discovery, instead of Yehovah, we found one manuscript where it's Yehovah. Now, you can start an entire denomination and say the true name of the creator of the universe is Yehovah, but to be honest with you, that's one manuscript out of over 7,000, and even within that manuscript, it's only in one passage. I call that a scribal error. How do I know it's a scribal error? Because I have this massive bulk of evidence where in all the other manuscripts, 1,721, it's Yehovah. So that's important. Now, one of the things we started looking at is, and then I want to give credit to T-Bone. T-Bone is this genius who helps me with this research, and there's other people who do. I want to give credit to Dawn and John and other people who have really been pushing and helping with this research, looking through manuscripts, to Ian and Nicole in New Zealand. We have people all around the world who are involved in this project, Michael, looking at manuscripts, Aaron in Dallas, all kinds of people. Many of them are believers in Yeshua, incidentally. And they just feel this calling to do this, to help and do this. And so I want to give credit to T-Bone because one of the things he's really...
Yeah, no, he won't even receive it because that's why you call him a T-Bone, because you're not even allowed to say his real name.
Well, he's a very humble person. And he truly is an incredible.
But without him, I mean, this is thousands of manuscripts
So I can, and I'm a very analytical reader. So when I sit down to examine a manuscript, I'm looking at every word and every jot and every tittle. And so for me to get through a 900-page manuscript, that's the course of my entire career. We literally, guys, I don't know if we should be telling people this, but we were sitting at your kitchen table, Michael, and we asked T-Bone. We had him on speakerphone. He said, T-Bone, we're doing this research. I can't actually share what it's about because it's exciting stuff.
Right.
But it will be revealed in due time.
Okay.
But he said, T-Bone, we need an answer to this. This is and I think it was something like a 360-something page manuscript. And I said, T-Bone, can you go through and check for this one little, almost like a jot and tittle. It was this one little symbol that could appear anywhere on the page, and we're having the conversation the next morning at breakfast, and you're like, do you think he's going to be done by the deadline? I said, oh, no, you don't understand. He's done. He stayed up till 3:30 in the morning and went through a 360-plus page manuscript and looked at every jot and tittle, and he found this thing that we were looking for. And now we can actually begin to have a definitive answer to certain questions that in the past it was like, good luck with that, right? Get a team of PhDs and professors, and they still would spend their entire career. And T-Bone went through and found this thing in one night. So one of the things he's pushing for, and I really want to give him credit, is he's coming from a very similar perspective as you, Michael. And he says, Nehemia, you're looking at the Tanakh. I also want to look at the New Testament. T-Bone says, I have this burning desire to find the name of Yehovah in the New Testament if it's there. Mm-hmm. And so he was with me over the summer in Israel, and we start to look at these manuscripts, which we had discovered in these catalogs, but to actually be able to see them, it's not so simple. So we're sitting in the basement of the National Library of Israel, and we start pulling manuscript after manuscript. And I want to just share a little taste of what we found. Can I do that?
Please do.
Okay.
I have to tell you, folks, before this, this is going to take us a while. In the hot tub, it was like 4 hours in the hot tub. At breakfast this morning, it was more than 2 hours. You're only going to get a little bit of this, but I'm going to have you at Passover this year. There is just so much that you've got in some of these Greek manuscripts. I'm not going to say any more about it right now, but there has been incredible things that we've been looking for hundreds of years.
Well, I personally haven't been looking at it for hundreds of years, but scholars have been looking at this topic really since the time for nearly 2,000 years. They've been talking about it, and for 400 years for sure this has been an issue. So we're going to share stuff at Passover. You're going to give me a chance to share at Passover?
Absolutely.
Stuff that there's no way we have time to share in this coming series of Shabbat Night Live, but we can get into a lot more depth.
Well, I got chills just like I did at the breakfast table this morning. I'm really looking forward to this.
I'm excited. But here's just a little taste of what we found. Now, I've talked in the series called The Lost Treasures of the Vatican about Hebrew New Testament manuscripts. Some people misunderstood what I talked about. Guys, I want you to go back and look at that, watch the series. Some people were saying, how can Nehemia say this is the first century copy written by John himself? That's not what I said. This was a 17th century manuscript copied from an earlier manuscript, which in turn was presumably copied from an earlier manuscript. Mm-hmm. Is it a translation from some other language or a Hebrew original? These are exciting vistas of research that are still open and need to be investigated. For example, I won't even go into it. You have incredible things there that I've learned since I did that series with you, Michael. For example, you have confusion between Sere and Segol and Kamatz and Patach, which is a characteristic of something called the Palestino-Tiberian vocalization. I mean, there's some exciting things in this manuscript that from the Vatican, which is really needs to be researched seriously by scholars. I've only just touched the surface because I'm doing so many other things. But here's one of the documents we know 100% without a question was translated, and we know what language it was translated from. Okay, so this is a manuscript that's never been shown before to the public. You would have to go to the National Library of Israel in the basement, and there you can see it in black and white, or you could go to Uppsala, which I want to say is in Sweden, Uppsala University, and there they have a unique manuscript. And I got there, wrote to them and contacted them and got them to produce for me a color photograph, which we're showing here for the first time.
Okay,
this is a color photograph of a manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew, and we know for a fact it was translated We know what it was translated from and by whom. So this is not a Hebrew original, but this is a translation into Hebrew, but we can still learn some incredible things from this manuscript about the translator and about the Jews of this period, and I think even about the Gospels. So it says Matthew chapter 3, translated by a man named Johann Kemper. Now, Johann Kemper of Uppsala, Sweden, he was not born Johann Kemper. He was born Moshe of Krakow. He was a Jew who converted to Lutheranism, moved to Sweden from Poland, and decided, I want to bring my Jewish brothers along into this faith, and in order to do that, I need to translate the Gospels into Hebrew. He was not a Greek expert, so he translated the Gospels from Syriac. Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic. The Pshita, you know about it well, Michael. And he could read that because he was an educated Jewish rabbi. And any educated Jewish rabbi, or even not rabbi, any really educated Jew should be able to read Aramaic fluently. It's part of the culture of the Jewish people. And so he read this in Aramaic, translated it into Hebrew from the Aramaic. And here we have in Matthew chapter 3, verse 3, translated from the Syriac into Hebrew. And it's talking about John, and it says, Hine hu ze asher mimenu niba Yeshayahu. This is the one concerning which Isaiah the prophet prophesied, Kol koreh bamidbar, a voice crying out in the wilderness, Penu derech, make straight the way. And there it says in the Hebrew, Yehovah, Yud-He Vav-He. Now, we know he translated it from Syriac, but he also knows the verse in the Tanakh, the origin in Isaiah. And so for his Jewish audience, who's the target audience here, he says, if I want the Jews to understand this, I can't put in Lord. I have to, for it to be authentic, I have to put in Yud-He Vav-He. Now, he doesn't put vowels in his text. However, on the opposite page of each page of the translation of Moshe of Krakow, he puts the Latin. And in the Latin, he writes Yehovah. Now, in English, people call that Jehovah, but in the Latin, it's actually pronounced Yehovah, and later Latin, it would be Yehovah. The point here, here's a really key point for me, Michael. And I know we're running out of time, but we might have to come back to this in the second half. So I'm not saying that Moshe of Krakow had a manuscript from the first century. That's not the case at all. We know he translated it from Syriac, but when he wrote it for his Jewish audience, he knew he had to write Yehovah, because if he wrote anything else, the Jewish audience would say, well, that's not authentic. Well, that's not the name of the God of Israel. We know the name of the God of Israel, and it's Yehovah. And if you write Yahweh, and he could have written Yahweh, this is the 18th century, 1710 approximately. Yahweh was well established. If he had written Yahweh, he would have been laughed out of Krakow. He would have been laughed out of Uppsala by every Jew around. He had to write Yehovah because that was known to the Jews as the true pronunciation of the name. And so I think, even though we know this is translated from the Aramaic, that this is powerful evidence of what the Jews in this period knew for centuries.
Nehemia, we're going to have to take a break for just a minute, and we're going to be back with more manuscripts that you have been waiting a lifetime to see, and you didn't even know it. Every episode of our international broadcast, we interrupt for 2 minutes to allow you, our viewers, to donate to this ministry. We monetize this ministry in no other way. We don't monetize it by empty promises that the Almighty is going to give you a condo on the Riviera, a yacht, or a Rolls Royce. We don't give you any of the hype. We're just saying that if this message has changed your life, if you have woken up to the fact that Yeshua is the Messiah and that we must hear and obey him and that he is the living Torah, the living word, then this is your opportunity to do what he said. Freely you have received, and at great expense to us, you have freely received. Now, this is your 2 minutes to freely give, and give bountifully, give abundantly. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got one chance, one lifetime to get it to the world, and this is it. 7 years ago, Nehemia Gordon proclaimed the name. At Hanukkah, he then asked us to join him in standing against the ban against the name, because the Almighty brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand so the whole world would know that his name is Yehovah. We stood with him, we prayed with him, and then it has turned into now 1,721 as of this recording, as of this morning, but you're bringing more evidence here from Sweden, other manuscripts that were where it was really written by a rabbi who became a Messianic Jew who wanted to communicate this to his people.
Right.
Tell us more.
Well, so in the 1721, those are just Tanakh manuscripts, right?
Oh,
we're not even talking about the New Testament manuscripts.
Oh, we're not talking about the treasures in the Vatican.
Right, that's beyond the 1721. That's just, I mean, Michael, there's an entire world we haven't even started looking at, which is prayer books, meaning there were Jews who copied prayers, and there they put in the vowels. All kinds of documents where Jews recorded the vowels that are outside of the actual Tanakh of the Old Testament. We focused on that because even that's going to take us years.
So not all Jews even followed the ban that was put in place by Rome initially.
They didn't, well, that's for sure, but that's a separate issue. Meaning these rabbis who are writing the name Yehovah with those vowels, they don't pronounce it that way. Meaning this is really interesting, and I can't get into all of it right now, but basically we have all these rabbinical sources. I did a teaching on my website, nehemiaswell.com. It's called 10 Rabbis Speak Out on the Name or something like that. And I show that there's 10 rabbis, and by the way, as of today, we have 19. 19 rabbis who explicitly tell us the vowels are Yehovah. And this is important because there's this misconception out there, even among very serious scholars, that no Jew ever thought the name was Yehovah. That's just a silly mistake that the Christians made because they didn't know what they were looking at. They read the vowels of Adonai and they thought those were the vowels of the name. And I've demonstrated that there are at least 10 rabbis, and now, like I said, I have 19, and I'm going to eventually share those publicly, who say the vowels of the name are Yehovah. And the point is when when Moshe of Krakow is writing this New Testament for his Jewish audience, he has to put in Yehovah as the pronunciation, otherwise they'll laugh him out of the synagogue. They won't listen to anything he has to say. I don't know if they listen to him anyway, right? But at least he had a chance to present to them what he understood to be the gospel to the best of his ability based on what he knew. And if he'd written Yahweh, he'd be laughed out of there. Now, here's another manuscript from Uppsala, Sweden, and it's slightly later than Johann Kemper or Moshe Krakow. This is one of his disciples. And here it's really interesting because here he's translated the Gospels once again himself.
So this is a disciple of his, then he believed in Yeshua then.
Right, absolutely. This is a disciple of his who I believe was from a Christian background originally, but studied Hebrew under Moshe Kemper, or Johann Kemper, and continued this process of refining and translating the Gospels. This time I want to say he translated it from Greek off the top of my head. But in any event, when he gets the name, what does he write? He writes Yehovah, and he puts in the vowels. Now, I'm not saying this is from the 1st century, quite the contrary. We know this was translated in the 18th century, but it was translated for a Jewish audience. And if you're translating it for a Jewish audience and you're putting in any vowels, they have to be the vowels Yehovah, because those are the vowels that the audience knows to be the true vowels. Now, somebody could come along and say, well, the Jews didn't know what they were talking about. Okay, well, all right.
Wait. Paul says the living oracles of God were committed to the Jews. That's precisely what he says.
Well, that's what Paul says, and there's no question that there's no question, in my mind at least, that when the scribes transcribed these vowels, and the standard understanding of this that scholars have is starting around the year 600, they started to write down the vowels. They didn't invent the vowels, though. The vowels had been fixed, and they were fixed in a form, at least in the 1st century. My book, Shattering the Conspiracy of Silence, we have it right here. I actually bring an example of a debate between these rabbis, and the discussion revolves around changing the vowels. And the one rabbi says, look, he says we can't actually change the vowels, but we can pretend for interpretation as if there's different vowels than what's written. And my question is, if these rabbis just made up the vowels out of the thin air, well, why didn't they just go ahead and change the vowels? Right? And they didn't. Right. What they said is, for the purpose of interpretation, we're going to act as if the vowels are different, but in the synagogue, we still read the original vowels. Now, were they written down or were they transmitted orally? That's something scholars discuss, and Jewish sources have discussed that for 500 years. But I think what could be proven very substantially, in my opinion, is that these vowels were fixed, at least in the first century. And I recently heard a lecture from this professor who said, in fact, these vowels go back to the temple priesthood, that these were things that were being communicated in the temple priesthood, transmitted from rabbi to disciple until finally they were written down. But it's not that they just pulled it out of the thin air. So we have these vowels, and here in the 18th century, when this professor at the University of Uppsala wants to convert Jews, and look, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Messianic Jew, I'm looking at this. We have the series here called the Karaite Files. I tell people I'm a Karaite Jew, very open about that. But when I'm understanding this within its context, what it tells me is these Jews who were the target audience, they knew it to be Yehovah, and I now have that confirmed from the Jews themselves. I can show you from Jews from this period and earlier and later, who said the vowels are Shva, Cholam, Kamatz, Yehovah, explicitly, not an opinion. This is a fact, that this is what they said. Now look, there were other opinions out there. There's one rabbi I found who says we don't know what the vowels were. There are other rabbis who say, no, it was these other vowels. But the consistent message repeatedly that I'm finding is the vowels Yehovah. That is then consistent with what I find in the manuscripts of the actual Bible of the Tanakh. So we have this series of sources. Now, Michael, one of the things I've heard from people is they say, Nehemia, we don't care if you bring, and I actually had a guy say to me, I don't care if you bring 1,000 manuscripts. And that was long before I had 1,000 manuscripts. Now it's at 1721 as of today. But he said, I don't care if you have 1,000 manuscripts. I was taught those are the vowels of Adonai. It's what it says in my grammar book. I don't care what you say. And we don't even trust the vowels of those Jews anyway. That's one of the arguments I've heard. And I want to address that. I don't think we're going to get to that this time because I want to share another type of manuscript that we recently discovered.
I'll say we're going to carry over. There's so much that you've got. Take your time.
Okay. All right. People say I talk fast, but that's because I have so much to say. So, Michael, one of the things we discovered, and this is literally in the last couple of weeks, is a set of manuscripts that were produced by the Jews of China. 1,000 years ago, these Jews who were Jewish merchants came on the Silk Road, arrived in China, and asked for permission from the Emperor of China to settle in China so they could carry out this trade. And one of the major trade routes of the Jewish world was from what today is Syria, through Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, into China. In fact, some of the earliest post-Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts that have been discovered with Hebrew characters were found in Afghanistan in Western China. Like, most people don't realize that. Jewish manuscripts with Hebrew characters in Afghanistan, because this was the international trade route, and you had Jewish communities all along the route.
Now, you spent some time in China.
So I spent a year in China, and one of my goals in China was to visit the one surviving community of Jews in a city called Kaifeng. Kaifeng is this community in China that at one time, during the period of what was called the Northern Song Dynasty, was the capital of China in the 12th and 13th century. By that time, the Jews had been in China for 200 or 300 years. And one of the things they were given there in China, these Jews, is, Chinese is a language with over 20,000 characters. And we hear these Chinese words, or I should say I hear these Chinese words, and there's all these words that literally sound the same, and even to the Chinese people they sound the same. And the only way to distinguish the words is by the character. So they could have a single syllable that audibly is identical with 60 different unrelated meanings. And the way that distinguishes is the character. And I remember in China, I would see people, they would say some word and the other person wouldn't understand them, and they draw the word on their hand, right? They draw the character. So this is why they have so many characters. So the Jews of China have 7 characters that are unique to Jewish surnames. These characters are not used for anything else in the Chinese language, as far as I know. They were granted to the Chinese Jews by the Emperor of China. And when you hear their name, I think, is something like Lee, right? And you're like, oh, it's a common name like Bruce Lee. No. But Bruce Lee has a different character than the Chinese Jew. So I go to visit these Chinese Jews when I was there in 2014. And I actually ended up meeting with 2 different groups of Jews. and I couldn't let the other group know I was meeting with the first group. And this is how I knew they were really Jews, because they don't talk to each other, right? You have two communities, actually three communities of Jews, and they're not on speaking terms. It proves they're Jewish. Michael, there's an old joke about a Jew who's stranded alone on a desert island. And he's there for years on the desert island, and finally he decides, I'm going to take some coconut trees, cut them down, and build myself a synagogue. But then he realizes, no, I have to build a second synagogue. And when they find him years later, they say, well, why did you need two synagogues? You're one guy. He said, the first one I go to every Shabbat. The second one I wouldn't be caught dead in. So
in China, they're doing that. They're separate.
It proves they're a bunch of Jews. All right, so I go and I meet these Jews, and they show me these incredible monuments. These it says in the municipal museum there, in the attic, hidden away, are these three monuments that were written, giving the history of the Chinese Jews, literally written in stone, going back 500 years, talking about how they arrived 1,000 years before, and they have these, all kinds of history and very interesting things. What I didn't know at the time is that in 1751, a group of British people came to China and got in contact with the Jews of Kaifeng and said, we want to buy some of your manuscripts. And they bought them. And this was important because there's a lot of floods in Kaifeng. So most of the original manuscripts that were in Kaifeng have been destroyed by a series of floods. But the ones that were brought from London survived.
They were brought to London?
They were brought
Kaifeng?
to London. First they were brought to Shanghai, and then from Shanghai they were purchased by the society in London, a Bible society. And then in the 1920s, they were purchased from this London society by the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. Now that was the place I went to see what's called HUC number 1, which is one of the important manuscripts of the Tanakh, which isn't from China, right? That's from land of Israel or somewhere in that area from much earlier. These manuscripts are much later. They're from approximately the 17th century, but they were copied by generation after generation by these Chinese Jews who over time had been cut off. They were cut off from the main population of Jews. They had these manuscripts of the Bible, and they didn't even necessarily know what they were copying, but Chinese culture is really good at reproducing things. And that's because they have such a complicated language, written language, so they have to be able to be really good at reproducing things. So they saw these Hebrew letters and characters, and they reproduced them. And I could now pick up a Chinese Bible from the 17th century, produced by a Chinese Jew in Kaifeng, and I can read it like I'm reading an Israeli newspaper or like I'm reading a manuscript from 1,000 years ago. It's perfect Hebrew.
Now, when you visit them, are you speaking Hebrew to them?
So one of the groups I spoke to in English, the other one I spoke to Chinese through an interpreter, but they were learning Hebrew, and we could write in Hebrew, and they could understand some of the written Hebrew, and I could understand what they were writing in Hebrew, which is pretty cool. Wow. And I'm meeting these Chinese Jews, and look, they look Chinese because they've been intermarrying there for centuries. But I asked this one woman, I said, when did you discover that you were Jewish? And she said, I don't, what do you mean? When I was 2 or 3 years old, my parents told me I was Jewish. Well, how did your parents know? Because they've always been Jewish. We have a Jewish character in our surname. And they told me about how there's characters specific to the Jews. When I was in Kaifeng, Michael, they took me to a place called Torah Learning Lane. There's a street in Kaifeng, China called Torah Learning Lane. And they were kind of known by the local population who didn't really understand what Jews were, but they knew those are the strange people who don't eat pork. Which you have to understand, for a Chinese person not eating pork, it'd be like if you said, well, it really would be like if an American said, look, I don't drink water. It's against my religion to drink water. The Chinese can't understand it. I remember being in China, and I would tell people, I don't eat pork, wabucher juro, and that's my broken Chinese. I don't eat pork meat, and they would look at me and they'd say, "How are you alive?" And I'd say, I seem to be doing pretty well. Maybe, yeah. Anyway, so when I was there in Kaifeng, I didn't know about these manuscripts. And even when I visited the Hebrew Union College, I didn't get to see everything. So I actually knew about some of their Chinese manuscripts, but not their Bible manuscripts from China. So now these manuscripts have gone online. And for the first time a few weeks ago, I was able to see them online, manuscripts that came out of Kaifeng in 1751. They were written probably 100 years before that. And they have the vowels. Can I show the people what they have?
Please.
All right. So they have, let me pull it up right here. Here it is. Oh, this is really cool. Look at this. This is the from the Hebrew Union College. It says Hebrew manuscripts from China, right? And it's one of many manuscripts. This is particular manuscript 59. And then here is a section of the Torah from China, and I can read this like I'm reading my Tanakh, printed in Jerusalem, and it says, Chag HaSukkot Ta'aseh Lecha Shivat Yamim, you will do for yourself the feast of Sukkot when you gather in the grain from your threshing floor, etc. And let me skip ahead, and it says, Shivat Yamim Tachog, 7 days you will celebrate La Yehovah, to Yehovah, and there the full vowels Yehovah. And by the way, guys, go watch one of the previous episodes I did where I talk about the B-52 bomber. That's this phenomenon that we don't have time to get into today, but I also have a teaching on my website, on nehemiaswall.com, called Cutting Through the Confusion from the Show Me State. I go into a lot more detail about the B-52 bomber. This is an example not only of Yehovah with the full vowels, but what I call the B-52 bomber phenomenon. And there it is, La Yehovah. Here is a second manuscript from a second scribe, and you can see it's a completely different handwriting, right? A second Jewish scribe.
And this
in
is
China. This is from China, from Kaifeng. It's a different passage. It says, Ki tidol neder la Yehovah Elohecha, when you make an oath to Yehovah, your God, and etc. And we have earlier on the page, it says Beit Yehovah, the house of Yehovah, and it says Yehovah Elohecha, again, Yehovah, your God. Here, even in Kaifeng, maybe not even fully understanding what they were copying, but they were preserving much, they were cut off, right? So they only had the much earlier manuscripts they brought with them from Afghanistan, and before that from Persia, and eventually from the land of Israel as they migrated east. These bands of Jewish merchants, and eventually settling in China, they brought with them these Hebrew manuscripts, and they copied them diligently, and I can read it perfectly, and it has the vowels Yehovah, even in China. This is within our included within our 1,721. And Michael, to me, and I want to get to this in a future episode if you'll allow me, but there's this prophecy that just burns in my heart. It's Malachi chapter 1, verse 11. And here, Michael, it's a fulfillment of the prophecy, this Chinese manuscript. Malachi 1:11, let me read it to the people. It says here in Malachi 1:11, okay, let me pull it up. It says, from the rising of the sun, can I read it in Hebrew?
Please
do. It says here in Hebrew, Ki mimizrach shemesh, for from the place of the rising of the sun, somebody say China, ve'ad mivo'o, until the place of its setting, somebody say Europe at the time of the known world, Gadol shmi bagoyim, my name is great among the nations, u'bechol makom muktar mugash lishmi, u'mincha tehora, and in every place. This is really interesting, Mike. I'm going to say that for next time when we talk about this. And it says again, Ki gadol shmi bagoyim, for my name is great among the nations. Amar Yehovah Tzevaot, says Yehovah of hosts. There's this prophecy in Malachi. Malachi lived approximately in 400 BC, and he prophesied that God's name would be great from the rising of the sun to the place of its setting. And I could just imagine the people in Israel at the time of Malachi who heard this in Jerusalem, and in their limited understanding of the world, maybe they thought this meant the rising of the sun, some places far away as, maybe Babylon or Persia, which they were familiar with, and maybe as far away as Greece, which they had some vague knowledge of. They couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams that what Malachi was talking about was the entire world, as far away as China, as far away as Iceland. We did a program about that in the Karaite Files. We talked about finding Yehovah's name in Iceland with the full vowels and his name being glorified there. And now the entire world, Malachi's words are true. Michael, we only have a very short time. Can you just briefly tell people about what I did to try to glorify Yehovah's name and spread this message?
Well, I want you to come back next time and go into this,
tell them what it is.
Because here it is. This is from Denmark. It's a
coin from the 1640s from the King of Denmark, and it says on it, guys, it says Yehovah with the full vowels, a fulfillment of the prophecy of Malachi. For years I wanted this coin, and I contacted a mint in Utah and had them reproduce this coin as a silver round with 1 troy ounce of silver. And on the back of the coin, what did I put? The verse For Malachi in Hebrew, Gadol Shmi Bagoyim. My name is great among the nations. And guys, you won't believe the story behind this coin and this silver round of how it ties in to the very fabric of the history of the United States of America, and it's a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. We'll talk about that next time.
Would you close with the Aaronic blessing?
I will, Michael.
The proper Aaronic blessing.
Yehovah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here with Michael and share the fulfillment of the words of your prophecy. Yevarechecha Yehovah v'yishmerecha. Yehovah bless you and keep you. Ya'er Yehovah panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yehovah shine his face towards you and be gracious towards you. Yisa Yehovah panav elecha. Yehovah lift his face towards you. V'yasem lecha shalom. And may he give you peace. May he give you shalom. Amen.
Well, you've just begun the adventure. Ladies and gentlemen, join us again here next week for Shabbat Night Live. Shavua Tov. Have a good week, and we'll see you here then. Thanks, Nehemia.
Thank you.